Okay, I said I would try and talk a little bit about treatment. After what you've heard today, I don't think you need me at all. In fact, I don't think you need me at all in these conferences because these guys are so smart. I just sit here in full of admiration. I just really think it's terrific, the science we've seen and the medicine we've seen, and the humanity we've seen from the folks who've been presenting who are at the sharp end, dealing with patients and the problems that patients have, not just the medical problems, but also the legal and all the hassle that goes with it. So I'm going to try and do something a little bit different, but first of all, I upset some people by my comments about the clinics. Our clinic is all right. Two different groups of people said, my clinic's all right. I feel better. So that's really quite a difficult comment to have to deal with. So I listened very carefully to them. And it seems to me important that we do listen. They stated they'd been helped by some clinics, and they defended their regional clinic, although only pacing, CBT and graded exercise was still being offered. That's all they were being offered. But they felt better because they talked to someone who had listened to them and had respected what they were saying. They found that helpful to be listened to, and I said it in my other presentation that we need to log the comments coming back from the clinics. Many of them are adverse, often from the same clinics that these people were talking about. So it's not a uniform experience of everybody, but still, some people find it helpful. And I just want to acknowledge these comments, but my concerns are this. There was no detailed physical examination, and there was no other treatment or any attempt to engage with any of the clinical signs that would have been found had they been examined. They also agreed that this was the second best. It's better than nothing. Half a loaf is better than none. Well, I'm afraid I have to disagree. I don't want to be unkind or unpleasant to people, but there is a case where the second best is not what we're after the best, and the second best is often the enemy of the best. I do not believe it's in our interests, or in anyone's interest involved with this disease, to allow the psychiatrists to claim that they are offering effective treatment for this illness when they are not. And you saw the report from Dr. De Meyler, where they did a study in Belgium. It's in Flemish and French, so that's why most of us haven't seen it, particularly the Flemish bit. And it says that the success rate was 6%. That was less than placebo. You know, how good can you get? You know, I do think this is important. So I'm sorry I've upset people. I don't like upsetting people because I'm really quite a shy, retiring character, which actually is true. But you don't believe me, but I understand why. But we're not here to upset or people deliberately, but we are here to help people who are very sick. And my awareness and understanding and meeting with patients is that these clinics are not helping them, and they provide nothing of significance to engage with their illness. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, and if some people find some help, from talking or counselling or whatever, then please go ahead and get that help. But don't look to the clinics who are claiming to be effectively treating this illness and providing the insurance agent industry with excuses for not supporting people with the proper finance for their own sicknesses. So that was unscripted because I had to do it last night, but I thought you ought to hear that because some people find it helpful. Right, just back to the Gibson Committee. It was great to have Ian Gibson with us because he spent a lot of time on this, and he came up with some very helpful work. And he's still keeping going with this, which is important for us and to know about that. We've got the questions about substantial funding being sought. He mentioned 2 million this morning. 11 million has been spent on other features. We want the 11 million, please, if you're going to do matching funding. We want to look at definitions, causes, diagnosis and treatment. We want the emphasis on the Canadian criteria, plus medical education, which has been mentioned several times today, about being inadequate and being changed. The NICE guidelines are inadequate. The MRC are failing to respond to the CMO's report. We've heard it all. And the benefits in the insurance industry are preventing the proper funding of people who are seriously ill and need all the help they can get. And money is the least thing we can give them, not the best. So I thought I would start what's excited me about this meeting is these syndromes, so-called syndromes of uncertain origin, which include Gulf War syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivity, ME, CFS, fibromyalgia, and also, I think, OP poisoning for the farmers. These all form an interrelated complex. They might be the same illness, but I don't think we can say that just yet. But they are complex, multi-system, multi-organ illnesses, embracing every aspect of our biology: neurology, cardiovascular, immune, gastrointestinal, respiratory, and endocrine. And the conundrum is that when you do routine tests, you find very little that's wrong with people. And Nigel Speight drew attention to this in his interesting presentation. So there's nothing wrong with you. You're all crackers, you see. That's the simplistic rendering of the official view. You're lazy, ill-disciplined, thinking high above your station, grand ideas, incapable, and really frustrated high flyers. Well, I don't think that's true. The people I know are high-flying people with lots of ability who are completely frustrated by their illness. This is just to show you how similar these things are. This is just the list of the most of the symptoms and the areas where these symptoms occur. And the pluses just show that everyone's got the same sort of symptoms, share the same symptoms with very few exceptions. But also, these last two columns, you will recognize that OPs, Gulf War syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivity, fibromyalgia, CFIDS, which is American for CFS-ME, I think. These are the interrelated syndromes of uncertain origin, but MS and AIDS are not. We now know that MS is a neurological illness, it's immune-driven, we think, and HIV/AIDS is an immune dysfunction. So this is telling us something about the neurology and the immunology of these illnesses. And the neuroimmune title for the Whitmore-Peterson Institute, I think, is a good title, and I think it's an honest title. These overlapping syndromes share a commonality which is identifiable to people who talk about their illnesses and describe symptoms. And it's whole body problems. I'll tell you where I got this from later, but this is a whole body issue, just going right the way through and round the body, all over the place. Every single system is affected, or may be affected, and that's the total body impact of these things. This is from a display from the Pesticide Action Network magazine. It's nothing to do with ME, but they're saying the same thing. So we're going to continue to press for the Canadian criteria as an international standard, and I think it's great to hear Dan saying this, and Kenny as well. From the international perspective, these seem to fit the bill. And Byron's comments about his definition are very helpful, but they do seem to be able to integrate these two insights. Byron's emphasis on early diagnosis seems to me to be absolutely essential. But if doctors will not make any serious attempt to engage with the illness until after 6 months, the chance is gone. And this will dictate, as Nigel Speight reminded us, the type of treatment you can give. With pooled immunoglobulins, Nigel was saying he got effective treatment that restored people to health if you got in early enough. And I know people who've had it for years who are still getting these pooled immunoglobulins and still feel that it's worth doing, even though it's not making them, not having a curative effect. I thought I'd put these up because these just illustrate yet again. We've not seen these listed out, but these are the five major features with symptoms drawn from the autonomic area, autonomic nervous system. We've talked about POTS and postural hypertension and things like that, irritable bowel. We've got neuroendocrine with thermostatic instability, anorexia, weight loss, and the neuropsychiatric things clicking in, and we've got the immune problems. These are the Canadian criteria. This is the guts of them, and this is what will help people. Any well-trained or reasonably trained physician should be able to find in this list clinical signs which he can identify without recourse to depending utterly on the patient describing their symptoms. These will provide clinical signs for a clear diagnosis. But there's the need for subtypes, which again have been mentioned by a lot of people. This is Leonard Jason's work, where he first, in a major presentation where he drew attention to this, and he saw the subtyping in terms of virology, immunology, neuroendocrinology, autonomic nervous system, and he saw also issues from the genetics and treatment. And he also makes a comment that CBT has zero effect after 3 years. Do we want to treat people who are this ill for 3 years and leave them in limbo? I don't think so. Viral nucleic acids, this is the exciting thing that I've taken away from this meeting and from the one in Adelaide that I went to where Kenny DeMilo was speaking. There are now emerging overarching schemes which can integrate the information and the symptoms that are seen in all these illnesses. And this is one that draws heavily on what Kenny DeMilo was saying, but also pays attention to the nitric oxide story that Martin was talking about this morning. Complex, highly integrated, often self-exacerbating changes in the biochemistry, a cascade of events going right through, resulting in alterations in the immune system, high levels of oxidative stress, pronounced apoptosis and cell death, this is again that Vance and others, and the gene activation and suppression story that Jonathan was telling us last year and this year. So this is a cascade that we're seeing, which seems to be shared by them all. And the questions that are beginning to emerge now are why are some people having this and others not? And again, Martin began to point the way to answers for that. And what Jonathan said just now, there are opportunities emerging now for marker molecules to be identified. And from what was said by Dan and by Vance as well, there are marker tests that can be used which are available now, which can be used to get a handle on this. And Kenny was saying it as well, that the NK cells do seem to be a marker cell which can be helpful in making a clear diagnosis. And the oxidative stress levels with this high sensitivity CRP test will provide a clinician with objective measurements about the condition. And these are the markers for what we're seeing here in this cascade. And the point that comes out of all this, that we are dealing with an inflammatory condition. So it is an itis after all. And I think that's important because we're having a lot of problems with the name. And I know patients do not want to change away from ME. We might have to. And I think some things that have been offered are very helpful, especially if you're going to engage with obstetricians and difficult physicians associated with the insurance industry. But it is an itis, it is an inflammatory situation that we're dealing with, a systemic, widespread inflammatory condition. I put this slide out, this is in the booklet I put out some 3 years ago now in Engaging with ME. This is taken from Paul Cheney's work, where he saw a sequence of events taking place in ME, starting with infection at the left-hand side of the slide, associated with a virus or some other organism. These infections, as we've discussed over and over in this meeting, can be other organisms like chlamydia, like rickettsia, like mycoplasma, like candida. They don't have to be viruses, but the viruses that come up top of the list are the Coxsackie family, the enterovirus family, HHV6 is clearly there. Epstein-Barr is often a feature of people's stories. So this will have an impact on how, if we have a virus screen, we will have information about what's driving this or initiating this problem. And you're into treatments then with antibiotics or pooled immunoglobulin. If you get in there early, all the better. And antioxidants will also be helpful in this glutathione and acetylcysteine, which is the NAC, and silymarin, which is a stimulant to the immune system. So there is a pattern of what's causing and driving the issue and how we might be able to work out useful treatments. And these are just some, by no means all, and probably not the best by now. He then looks at neural. He sees genesis as a move from an acute inflammatory infectious condition to neural damage, with the xenobiotic toxicity also kicking in there, and things like injury to the trauma from injury. And again, there are things that can be done with massive oxidative stress. There's a big problem here in damaged nervous system, And there are things that have been used. We've mentioned CoQ, and we've mentioned lipoic acid and other antioxidants, and mitochondrial support. I'm not sure that it belongs just there, but this is how he did it, his scheme, not mine. And then he goes on to the gut. Now, we haven't talked a lot about the gut. Kenny DeMarley did mention it as a significant area, and it is a significant... Who's got gut problems? Right, yes. So it's significant, yeah. So the gut is an area that needs to be attended to, and this is where many of the complementary medicines and the supplementary medicine ideas have been able to be picked up by people who are ill. This is where you go for your supplements, you go for your probiotics, your prebiotics, your glutamine. This is where people are buying these things. It's not the only place, but a lot of people are aware of a gut problem. And there is a gut-brain axis. Toxic metals can play a real role in gut dysbiosis. Again, Kenny mentioned that. So I think the gut is important. And one of my other hats is my association with the Autism Research Unit. And one of the questions I want to ask all the experts here is, can we see any link between autism and these syndromes of uncertain origin? And a number of people from their writings and from their noddings are saying, yes, we have seen something. We don't know what it means, but we've seen it. And in the gut in autism is seriously dysfunctional. So that's just an aside, really. And in this area, there's the disturbance of the hypothalamic axis as well, which would come under neural as well, so it straddles. So these are just some things that we've got drawn out of that scheme. We've got the ability to use antiviral drugs, and the one that's in all the news is valganciclovir, which is one of the family of drugs, the acyclovir group of drugs, which are effective against herpes type only. So if you've got a herpes-type infection, it's treatable. If you haven't, hard luck, you're still stuck with a problem. If you've got an enterovirus, it won't help. And just to sort of blanket prescribe these things is not going to be helpful either, I don't think. It's going to be a lot of wasted money and a lot of disappointed people. There is a drug that's been mentioned about as an enterovirus blocking drug, and that's pleconaril, which is not available in the UK. And Betty Dowsett introduced this some years ago now. But there are doubts about its efficacy, and I've not got any studies on this, but other people might know more than I do in this regard. Then you've got your broad-spectrum antivirals, the pooled immunoglobulins that Nigel mentioned and John Richardson used extensively. Get in there early for the best results. Loricidin is something that was recommended to me to look at, and I haven't had time to look at it fully, but this is a medium-chain fatty acid derivative, really, and it does seem to be helpful for some people, but it needs to be checked out much more thoroughly than I have done so far. Ampligen we know about, and again, from what Kenny and Dan have been saying, this seems to be something that is useful in a subset. It's not useful for everybody, but it's useful in a subset. And I know that Jonathan's been looking at the possible use of interferons, and then there's things like the other cytokines, particularly TNF-alpha blockers, which might be helpful. You can support the immune system with a variety of natural products, milk thistle, which is, we've already mentioned, ashwagandha and ginseng, which are herbs drawn from the Indian and Chinese herbals. And then there's antioxidants. Glutathione is a big one. Glutathione is not easy to get in. It can be given by infusion, and it is done by people who are expert at it and authorized to do it. And I know that Jean Monroe is here, and glad to see her, uses this quite a lot. That's the molecule for our cells. That's what they want, but you've got to get it in there, and that's not always as easy or as simple as it sounds. Then there's antibiotics used for things like mycoplasmas, like the chlamydias and the borrelias and the rickettsia. Treatable, tough, hard on the gut. If you don't look after the gut, you're going to have a rough trouble with the gut. And then you've got the antifungals, which again we raised in discussion and debate, and are widespread and known to be part of a gut dysbiosis, and then antioxidants. The heart's been omitted from all this by Paul Cheney, which is a sort of irony, because he himself had a very severe heart problem and had to have a heart transplant. And he's now seems to be functioning normally when I saw him on his video. But the heart is attacked by viruses, we know that, and also by bacterial products, has been mentioned several times already in our meeting. So the heart does need to be looked at and carefully. The neurological, the The xenobiotic toxicity that was mentioned reminded me of this very big series of reports from the World Wildlife Foundation on the massive body loading that many people are carrying of toxic xenobiotics, things like pesticides, the chlorohydrocarbons and the chlorocarbons and the organochlorine pesticides, the organobromine flame retardants, the organofluoro, non-stick frying pan covers and anti-stain things on carpets. We can't move for these things in our homes. We're picking these things up and they've got an increasing body load of these persistent organic chemicals. And then we've got the whole thing from pesticides, organophosphates have been mentioned widely, herbicides, and the GM industry uses glyphosate and glufosinate as major herbicides. Both of these are related to the nerve agents chemically, and one wonders just really whether we've looked at these carefully enough before we let them loose on the population. And all my engagement with this says we haven't. And we've got brain injury, we've mentioned trauma, that was mentioned earlier by Byron, I think. Various drugs have been used, these GABA agonists, the benzodiazepines, but they've got a bad reputation for other reasons. And we've got calcium antagonists, can't spell it, it's too late at night, which some people are using in low dosage. The problem with drugs for people with ME is that they are very sensitive to any kind of chemical, including drugs, and they find it very difficult to take them unless they're given at very low doses, often at doses which are well below the recommended clinical dosage. So they need to be approached with caution and care. Then there's new stuff coming out with nerve growth factors and things like that which can facilitate and support nerves that have been damaged. I've put these under whole body effects, vitamin B12, particularly in high doses of folate. Many people find this helpful, but this is stopped. It's been stopped. I know one clinician near, I didn't know he existed. He's just 2 miles down the road from me, and he's prescribing these. He's had his wrist slapped. You are not allowed to prescribe these vitamins in high dose at all, and we don't want you putting even moderate doses into patients who are within various biochemical limits. And this bypasses all the big questions. Is it in the right place? Is it doing the right thing? What's going on to need it? And you heard from Martin and you've heard from Vance as well that B12 is a nitric oxide scavenger, and that's a one-to-one basis. So you need it at the same level as you need a conventional drug. You need to give it in milligrams. And you can't just get away with a microgram dosage that's meant to sustain normal metabolism. Mitochondrial support, you've heard Sarah. In the midst of all her woes, still triumphant, bless her. She's developed the mitochondrial support regimen, which is useful and helpful, and many people are finding it helpful or using it. Who's used it and found it helpful? Right. Not too many yet. So Sarah's trying to provide this at minimum costs, and it's difficult because she was forbidden to prescribe this. She was forbidden to use it in treatment of patients, so she resigned from the clinic that was supposed to be her baby. She couldn't help people, so she left. She wasn't going to stand time, spend around pretending to help when she can't. You'll see in the literature from the ME Association, earlier literature, where they've had small reports on the use of NADH, which is part of the respiratory chain, and succinate, which feeds into the respiratory chain. These have been found to be helpful by some people. Not by everybody, but by some people. They support oxidative phosphorylation, which Sarah mentioned in her mitochondrial support. Thyroid preparations. The number of doctors who have got clobbered for prescribing thyroid and asking that T3 might be incorporated. And Sarah's in the same kind of trouble at the moment. But they've won their cases, and we can win Sarah's, I think. The other thing with thyroid is the use of selenium. Most people in this country are selenium deficient. This is studies that have been done. It's all in the BMA literature. It's not novel stuff. It's not new stuff. It's not obscure stuff. But we still haven't learnt the lesson of the selenium story. And how many of you have been tested for selenium deficiency? The lipids, the omega-3, and that should be omega-6 actually as well. The omega-6, the omega-3s. The omega-3s are very important in brain lipids, and this is the stability of the membrane to these cells. If that's dysfunctional, then transmission is going to be disrupted, and the whole function of the cell is going to be disturbed. So the story of the lipids is very important, and again, some people are using this, a lot of people, in fact. Who's using lipids? Who's using omega-3s and omega, yeah. Who's finding them helpful? Yeah, well, most people are finding them helpful, yes. But they don't work, you know. And Basant Pure has been very much involved with this, but a lot of other people have as well. And we've used it in autism and find it very beneficial for autistic children. So that's just something that is, you know, a useful thing to know about, and it's worth trying. And it's, if we could prescribe it, and there are now some areas of the country where you can prescribe it, and doctors can prescribe it. So just check it out. You might be able to get it on prescription. This is just to show you what happens in the gut that Kenny was talking about. These are the tight cell junctions between cells in the gut. If these get broken or opened up, and the bacteria are good at doing this, as lots of other things are, lots of drugs do it as well, drugs and pesticides, then the gut contents leak out into the systemic circulation, and you've got a toxic load coming from the gut, which is loaded with toxins, which are all right in there, and provided we carry out our normal functions regularly, they'll go out. But there is a big issue here about toxin load coming out of the gut. Okie doke, Sunderland Protocol. This is just an attempt, this is an autism protocol really, about how to handle the dysfunctional gut in autism. Take out the bullets, which is casein and gluten, and that's the times to do it. With a food diary to check for other foods, such as things that people being sensitive to avocados I find astonishing and terribly worrying, because I think they're fantastic food. I hope it's not going to happen to me. Then you've got the question with vitamins and minerals and polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are the omega-3s and 6 I was talking about, amino acids, the sort of things that some people find helpful. The allergies that people can be evaluated for, and the question of pesticide exposure. Parasitic organisms, active reconstruction of the gut, sulfation issues. This is Rosemary Waring in Birmingham, who's done a lot of work on this. If you're having trouble with getting magnesium and sulfate into your body, and sulfate is important, because sulfate is a key player in our well-being and in the amino acid cycles associated with methionine and cysteine, then these are very helpful, and Epsom salts in the bathwater, we now know, so thanks to the students in Birmingham, that it is absorbed. They've been having baths in magnesium, Epsom salts and magnesium sulfate, and been taking blood samples to see what's happened, and it's going in. You've a lot of skin. If you get up to your neck in a good warm bath of magnesium sulfate, something will go in. So it's a way if you're struggling with it. You can take it orally, but it usually gives you diarrhea if you're not very careful. The supplementary enzymes. Who uses supplementary enzymes? Yeah. Who gets it prescribed? Because that can be prescribed. They can be prescribed. Puvas, we've mentioned those. Glutamine. Glufosinate herbicide blocks glutamine synthetase. And it goes into the gut when we eat this. If and when we eat this stuff, we should resist it as long as possible, and forever, hopefully. That's what's going to happen in the gut, and that's just where you don't want it. Other things, megadoses of vitamins and DMG, dimethylglycine, and things like salicylates that some people are particularly not happy with. This is another way of doing it. This is from the Institute for Functional Medicine. Remove, replace, re-inoculate, repair. Again, you can do these things, and you can see how it works. These are just some quick examples of what happens in the gluten-sensitized gut. It can express itself in the skin, in neurological disorders, which is rather worrying, and it may be the only manifestation of gluten sensitivity in some cases. So we need to be aware of that. There are at least 29 conditions associated with leaky gut. So this is an easy question. Leaky gut is going to be something that can give rise to lots of things, and a good clinician will know how to tackle that. The amateurs, and I would put myself very much in that category, are better keeping quiet, because we don't know. This is just again showing the succession from colonic epithelial activation, bacterial metabolites, the liver, inflammatory disorders, all this cascade from food, partial digestion, the compromised digestive processes, immune activation, and the whole system gets compromised. This is arthritis and GI disease. You can get arthritis, arthritic joints. Heart disease with bacterial endotoxins, we've talked about those, and with Coxsackie-B. All these things can come out of the dysfunctional gut. So it's a massive area that needs to be carefully looked after. The blood-brain barrier suffers the same sort of damage from these compounds, and stuff leaks into the brain in the same way. And then This is just, I think we're nearly at the end. This is blood flow reduced in the brain areas. This is from a report in Australia. It's a part of the brain that controls the smooth muscle of the gut. So this interaction is very important, and the smooth muscle of the gut being dysfunctional because of damage to the brain, the central changes, is very significant. It also integrates autonomic information as well. And then a second study from Richard Burnett in Adelaide, where he's shown there's been a 20% reduction of blood in the left temporal lobe, which controls access to language. So why having problems speaking? Well, you might be having problems speaking because this area of the brain has got a reduced blood flow. This is our summary slide from some earlier lectures. This is just an attempt to put together the sort of insights we've had and the sort of suggestions we make for treatment as a result of these insights. The brain, the immune system, the HPA axis and the gut are all interacting and speaking to each other, and these can be made dysfunctional by organophosphates, Gulf War syndrome, organochlorines, MCS, FMS, CFSME, autism, and probably lots of other things as well. But they share a common biochemistry, a pool of biochemistry, which has become disordered and dysfunctional. But they also have, as these ovals are meant to indicate, part fits in there, but part fits outside. And it's a tremendous clinical challenge, and I'm delighted that the clinicians who are here today taking up this challenge and helping us to get there. These are overlapping functions of dysfunctional states. And Jonathan mentioned tryptophan. Tryptophan's a big player in the gut, and this is part of our story. I hope it helps you, and I hope it gives you some useful things to think about. And what we ought to do is produce a list of potential treatments with some kind of explanation to help people to find the best one for themselves, in conjunction with their sympathetic and helping clinician. Thank you very much.